alpha male boss made me his secretary, but my husband's reaction shocked me. Hi Reddit, my name is Emily. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've been married to my husband Mark. I always thought we had a strong, steady relationship. Mark was the kind of man you could count on, reliable, kind, and completely devoted to me. I used to think that no matter what happened, we could weather any storm together, but I was wrong. Everything changed last year when I got a new job as the personal secretary to my boss, Ryan. It was supposed to be a big step forward in my career, a chance to prove myself and build something meaningful before Mark and I started a family. That was the plan, or at least that's what I told myself. I insisted on taking the job even though Mark had his reservations. Mark had always been supportive of my career, but when I told him about the position, he hesitated. He worried about the long hours, the late nights, and how it might strain our relationship. He even mentioned Ryan's reputation, how he'd heard stories about his charm and confidence being more than just professional. I brushed off his concerns, telling him this was a huge opportunity for me and that we'd make it work. I promised him that we'd still have time for each other, that it wouldn't change anything between us. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. From the moment I started working for Ryan, I was drawn to him. He was everything Mark wasn't, confident, assertive, and completely at ease in his own skin. Ryan had this way of commanding a room, of making everyone around him feel like they wanted to impress him. At first, I told myself it was just admiration. He was my boss, after all, and it was natural to respect him. But over time, those feelings started to shift. Ryan was the kind of man who knew exactly what to say to make you feel special. He'd compliment my work in ways that made me feel seen, like I was the only one who truly understood what he wanted. He'd ask me personal questions. Nothing too invasive, just enough to make me feel like he cared about me as a person, not just an employee. It was subtle at first, but those small moments started to add up. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just part of working closely with someone so charismatic. But deep down, I knew better. I started dressing differently for work, paying more attention to my appearance, hoping Ryan would notice. And he did. At home, things started to change too. Mark noticed that I was distracted, that I wasn't as engaged as I used to be. He tried to talk to me about it, asking if everything was okay, but I brushed him off. I told him the job was just demanding and that I was adjusting to the new responsibilities. He believed me, at least he pretended to. I don't know when exactly the lines started to blur between Ryan and me. It wasn't like there was one big moment where everything changed. It was gradual. Late nights at the office, shared drinks after work to celebrate a big win, conversations that became more personal than they should have been. Ryan had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the room, and I craved that feeling more than I cared to admit. It wasn't long before I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Less than a year after I started the job, Ryan and I began an affair. I told myself it was a mistake, that it was just a one-time thing, but that wasn't true. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I did it anyway. At first, I thought I could keep my two lives separate. I thought I could be the perfect wife to Mark while indulging in the excitement of my affair with Ryan. But things don't work like that. The guilt started to eat away at me, and it showed in the way I treated Mark. I became distant, withdrawn, always finding excuses to stay at work late or avoid spending time with him. He noticed, of course he did. Mark is smart, and he knows me better than anyone. When he finally confronted me about it, I tried to lie. I told him he was imagining things, that he was being paranoid. But Mark wasn't buying it, and when he found the proof, the emails, the texts, there was no denying it anymore. Now, everything I've built is falling apart. Mark knows everything, and he's told me he wants nothing to do with me anymore. I've tried to apologize, to explain that I made a mistake, but he doesn't want to hear it. And honestly, I can't blame him. To make matters worse, I can't leave my job. I've tried to convince myself it's because I need the income, but the truth is, I don't want to give it up. Walking away from Ryan, from the life I've built at work, feels impossible, but staying has only made things worse. Mark says he's done with me, and I don't know what to do. I've lost his trust, his love, and any chance of repairing what we had. And now I'm sitting here wondering how I let my life spiral so far out of control. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't take the people you love for granted, and don't let yourself get swept up in something you can't control. I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. And now I've lost everything that mattered. Mark and I started our marriage deeply in love, full of plans and excitement for the future. He was steady, dependable, and kind, the type of person I knew I could rely on for anything. We shared dreams of building a life together, and for Mark, that meant starting a family sooner rather than later. He often talked about having kids, picturing the life we'd create in the years ahead. I loved the idea too, but I wasn't ready. I felt like I still had so much to accomplish, so much to prove to myself. I told Mark I needed more time, that I wanted to establish my career before taking on the responsibilities of motherhood. At first, he seemed to understand. He agreed to wait, but I could tell he hoped it wouldn't take long. As the years went by, the topic came up more frequently. Mark gently reminded me that we weren't getting any younger, and that he didn't want to wait forever. I reassured him, saying that we'd have kids eventually, but deep down, I felt a growing urgency to focus on my career. I didn't want to be one of those women who gave up her ambitions for her family and spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been. When the opportunity to work for Ryan as his personal secretary came along, it felt like a turning point. Ryan's company was prestigious, and the role would put me directly under the CEO. It was the kind of job that could make or break a career. I couldn't imagine saying no. Mark, however, wasn't as enthusiastic. He had reservations about the long hours and the demanding nature of the job. He worried it would put even more strain on our marriage and push our plans for a family even further down the line. He was also uneasy about Ryan himself. Mark had heard about Ryan's reputation as a charismatic but arrogant leader who thrived on control and attention. I dismissed Mark's concerns, telling myself, and him, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I assured him we'd figure it out, that we were strong enough to handle any challenges the job might bring. Mark reluctantly agreed, but I could sense his unease. He didn't argue, though. He wasn't the kind of person to stand in the way of my ambitions, even if it meant setting aside his own hopes for our future. When I started the job, I threw myself into it completely. The pace was fast, the hours long, and the expectations high, but I thrived on it. Ryan was everything I'd imagined, confident, assertive, and impossible to ignore. He had this commanding presence that made people sit up and take notice. From the very beginning, I found myself captivated by him. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Admiring my boss wasn't the same as crossing any lines. But the admiration didn't stop there. Ryan had a way of making people feel special, of singling them out and giving them his full attention. It was intoxicating. Over the weeks, I began to notice the little things. He'd compliment my work, acknowledge my efforts in ways that felt more personal than professional. He'd ask questions about my life outside of work, not invasive, but enough to make me feel like he cared. I found myself looking forward to those moments, seeking his approval more than I probably should have. At home, Mark started noticing changes in me. He mentioned how distracted I seemed, how I wasn't as engaged as I used to be. I brushed it off, blaming the stress of the new role. I reassured him that everything was fine, even though I could feel the distance growing between us. Ryan, meanwhile, continued to blur the lines. He began sharing more about his own life during our late nights at the office, painting himself as someone driven by ambition, but also burdened by the weight of leadership. He had this way of making it seem like we were in this together, like I was the one person who truly understood him. I started putting more effort into my appearance, telling myself it was part of the job. But deep down, I knew I wanted Ryan to notice, and he did. He'd make comments about how polished I looked or how well I carried myself, little remarks that stayed with me long after he said them. Mark and I continued to drift further apart. He brought up starting a family again, saying that maybe it was time to slow down and focus on us. I told him I wasn't ready yet, that the job was taking all my energy, and I needed more time to settle into it. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but I ignored it, convincing myself that I was doing this for both of us, for our future. Looking back, I see how selfish I was. I see how I let myself get swept up in the excitement of my new job and the attention I was getting from Ryan. At the time, though, I told myself everything was fine. I had my career, my marriage, and my admiration for Ryan neatly compartmentalized in my mind. But the reality was, those lines were already starting to blur, and I was too caught up in my own world to see the cracks forming around me. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, maybe I would have been able to stop it. But it was gradual, a series of small decisions that didn't seem like much at the time, but eventually added up to the biggest mistake of my life. Less than a year into my job, things between Ryan and me began to shift. It started with late nights at the office, working together on big projects or preparing for important meetings. We'd sit across from each other in the glow of the office lights, the rest of the building dark and empty, sharing coffee and quiet conversation as we worked. Those moments felt intimate in a way I didn't want to admit. Then came the after-work drinks. At first, it was just a casual way to unwind after a stressful day. Ryan would suggest grabbing a drink to celebrate a win or decompress after a tough meeting, and I'd agree, telling myself it was just part of the job. But those evenings quickly became something more. Ryan had a way of making me feel special, like I was the only person who truly understood him. He'd confide in me about his struggles, his ambitions, and the pressures of his role. He painted himself as a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and I found myself wanting to ease that burden. One night, after a few too many drinks, everything changed. We had gone to a quiet bar to celebrate landing a major client, and the atmosphere felt different, more charged, more personal. Ryan leaned closer, his hand brushing against mine, and I didn't pull away. By the end of the night, I found myself at his apartment, crossing a line I told myself I never would. The guilt hit me almost immediately. As I lay awake in Ryan's bed that night staring at the ceiling, all I could think about was Mark. I imagined him at home, waiting for me, trusting me, and it made me feel sick. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Ryan made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. With him, I felt seen, appreciated, and desired. It was intoxicating, and I couldn't bring myself to stop. At home, things began to change. I became distant, distracted, and withdrawn. Mark noticed, of course he did. He asked if everything was okay, if there was something I wanted to talk about, but I brushed him off. I told him the job was just demanding and that I was tired all the time. He tried to believe me, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I stopped engaging with Mark the way I used to. I found excuses to avoid conversations about starting a family, saying I wasn't ready, or that we needed to focus on our careers for a little longer. I spent more and more time at work, coming home late or skipping dinner altogether, claiming I had deadlines to meet. The truth was, I was living a double life. During the day, I was Ryan's secretary and confidant, juggling work responsibilities with stolen moments of intimacy. At night, I went home to Mark, pretending everything was fine, even though the cracks in our marriage were becoming impossible to ignore. No. It wasn't just the time I spent with Ryan that was different. It was the way I prioritized him over Mark in subtle but undeniable ways. I found myself thinking about Ryan constantly, replaying our conversations in my head, or checking my phone for his messages when I was supposed to be spending time with my husband. I started dressing differently, choosing outfits I knew Ryan would notice, putting more effort into my appearance than I ever had before. Mark noticed those changes too. He mentioned once that I seemed to be putting a lot of energy into work lately, but I brushed it off, saying I wanted to make a good impression. I could tell he didn't believe me, but he didn't push. That was the kind of man Mark was, patient, understanding, always giving me the benefit of the doubt. But even his patience had limits. As the weeks went on, the tension between us grew. Mark tried to bridge the gap, suggesting we spend more time together or plan a weekend away, but I always had an excuse. I was too busy, too tired, too focused on work. In reality, I was too focused on Ryan. Balancing the two worlds became harder and harder. The lies piled up and the guilt gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Ryan was magnetic, and being with him made me feel like a different person, someone exciting, someone desired. I convinced myself that I could keep everything separate, that I could have both my marriage and my affair without either falling apart. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The cracks in my marriage were getting wider, and I could feel Mark slipping away. And yet, I couldn't seem to let go of Ryan. I was caught in a web of my own making, and I had no idea how to untangle myself. Looking back now, I can see how blind I was to the damage I was causing. But at the time, I was too caught up in the thrill of it all to see the destruction I was leaving in my wake. It all unraveled on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of night that used to be uneventful in the best way. I had stayed late at work again, caught up in yet another project with Ryan that I told myself was crucial. By the time I got home, the house was dark, and I assumed Mark had gone to bed early. I didn't notice anything unusual at first. My bag went on its usual hook, my shoes by the door. It wasn't until I walked into the living room that I saw Mark sitting on the couch, his face illuminated by the glow of my laptop. My stomach twisted the moment I realized what he was holding. He had my laptop open, my email account displayed on the screen. I knew immediately what he must have found. I had been careless, forgetting to log out of my work email that morning, thinking I'd only be gone a short while. Now, the evidence of everything I had been hiding was staring him in the face. Mark didn't say anything at first. He just looked up at me, his expression a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Then he turned the screen toward me, and I saw the messages, the ones I'd written to Ryan, full of flirtation and plans to meet up. My heart sank as I realized there was no way to explain this away. I opened my mouth to deny it, to claim it wasn't what it looked like, but the words felt hollow even before they came out. Mark cut me off, demanding to know how long this had been going on. His voice was trembling, not with anger, but with pain, and it broke something inside me. At first I tried to minimize it, saying it wasn't serious, that it was just a mistake. But the more I spoke, the more I realized how absurd it sounded. The messages were explicit, undeniable, and the hurt on Mark's face made it clear there was no use lying. I admitted it. I told him about Ryan, about the affair, about how it had started with late nights and drinks after work. I said it had gotten out of hand, that I hadn't meant for it to happen, but even as I spoke, I could feel the weight of my words crushing what was left of our marriage. Mark was devastated. He accused me of putting my career and my attraction to Ryan above our relationship, of destroying everything we had built together for something so meaningless. I tried to apologize, to tell him it was a mistake, but he wouldn't hear it. When he asked if I planned to quit my job, I hesitated. The truth was, I hadn't even considered it. The job had become such a central part of my life that the thought of leaving it felt impossible. I told Mark I couldn't quit, that my career was all I had left, but the look on his face made me realize how that sounded. He accused me of choosing Ryan over him, and in that moment I couldn't argue. Mark didn't say much after that. He stood up, closed the laptop, and walked past me without another word. The silence that followed was suffocating. The next few days were a blur of tension and avoidance. Mark barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were cold and clipped. I tried to reach out, to apologize again, but he had already shut me out completely. Then came the day everything exploded. It was a normal morning at the office, or as normal as it could be with the constant undercurrent of guilt and anxiety I'd been carrying. I was at my desk, trying to focus on my work, when I heard raised voices at reception. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. The sound grew louder, closer, and then I heard Mark's voice. My blood turned cold. He stormed past the receptionist, ignoring her protests, and headed straight for Ryan's office. Everyone in the open-plan workspace stopped what they were doing, eyes wide as Mark pushed open the glass door without hesitation. I stood frozen, dread pooling in my stomach. I couldn't hear everything he was saying, but the words I caught were enough. Affair, betrayal, disgusting. He was shouting, his voice carrying across the office, leaving no doubt about what he was accusing Ryan of, or me. I tried to stop him, stepping into the office to calm him down, but it was too late. Mark was furious, calling out Ryan for destroying his marriage and accusing me of being complicit. I could see the shock and confusion on my co-workers' faces through the glass walls, their eyes darting between us as they pieced together what was happening. Ryan, for his part, remained calm. He denied everything, deflecting Mark's accusations and insisting he had no idea what he was talking about. It was infuriating to watch him distance himself so effortlessly while I stood there exposed and humiliated. Security eventually arrived and escorted Mark out, but the damage was already done. The entire office knew what had happened, and I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. That afternoon, HR called me into a meeting. They said there had been complaints about unprofessional behavior and that an investigation would be launched immediately. Ryan, of course, played the victim. He claimed the situation was entirely my fault, that I had crossed boundaries and made him uncomfortable. I wanted to defend myself, to tell the truth about how things had really unfolded, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Ryan was the CEO, untouchable, and I was just a secretary whose actions had become a liability. By the end of the day, I was fired for misconduct. Ryan, meanwhile, walked away with his reputation intact. That night, Mark packed his things and left for good. He didn't say much, just that he couldn't stay with someone who had destroyed their marriage and lied to him for so long. The look in his eyes as he walked out the door was one of pure resignation, as though he had finally given up on me entirely. The following week, I was served with divorce papers. Sitting alone in our now empty home, the weight of everything I had lost hit me all at once. I had destroyed my marriage, my career, and any sense of stability I had, all for an affair that hadn't meant anything in the end. Ryan had moved on without a second thought, leaving me to deal with the fallout alone. I thought I could have it all, that I could juggle my career, my marriage, and my affair without consequence. But I was wrong. Now, I'm left with nothing but regret and the echoes of the life I used to have. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't take the people who love you for granted, and don't let ambition blind you to what really matters. I thought I was in control, but in the end, I lost everything. Update. Hi Reddit, it's me again. I don't even know why I'm writing this, maybe to make sense of what's happened or to hear something other than the thoughts that have been swirling around my head for weeks. Either way, I feel like I need to get this out, even if it's just into the void. Mark has filed for divorce. I saw it coming, of course, but that didn't make it any easier when the papers arrived. The official tone of the documents, the coldness of the language, felt like a punch to the gut. There it was, in black and white, the end of everything we'd built together. I'm no longer in the house. Mark made it clear he didn't want me there, and honestly, I couldn't bear to stay either. Every corner of that house was a reminder of him, of us, of what I've lost. The photos we took on our honeymoon, the couch where we used to curl up and watch movies, even the stupid coffee table we spent hours picking out, it was all too much. I moved into a small apartment across town. It's bare, impersonal, and painfully quiet. The silence here isn't comforting, it's suffocating. I sit here for hours on end, staring at the walls, replaying everything in my head. The what-ifs, the moments I could have stopped myself, the choices I made that brought me here, they're all I think about. Mark isn't speaking to me. We only communicate through lawyers now, and even that is minimal. The man who once called me his everything now treats me like a stranger. It's what I deserve, I know that, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. And it's not just Mark I've lost. Friends, family, everyone seems to have chosen sides, and it's not hard to see which side they've picked. Mark was always the dependable one, the one everyone admired. He's the victim in this, and I'm the villain. Mutual friends who used to check in on me, invite me to gatherings, or even just send a quick text have disappeared. It's not that they don't know where I am, it's that they don't care. I saw a picture online the other day of a group dinner we used to be part of. Mark was there, smiling, surrounded by people who looked at him like he'd been through something unimaginable. And he has. Even my own family isn't on my side. My mom called once, not to offer comfort, but to tell me how disappointed she was. She said Mark didn't deserve what I did to him and asked how I could throw away everything for someone like Ryan. I didn't have an answer for her then, and I still don't now. Ryan, I don't even know where to start with him. He hasn't reached out since I was fired. No apology, no explanation, nothing. He's still at the company, of course, walking the halls like he owns the place because, well, he does. I've heard from a few former coworkers that he's as charming and confident as ever, completely unbothered by the chaos he helped create. It's humiliating to think about how much I gave up for him. At the time, I convinced myself it wasn't about Ryan, that it was about me, about what I wanted and needed. But looking back, I can see how much of it revolved around him. His attention, his approval, his presence. I threw away a man who truly loved me for someone who couldn't even be bothered to check in on me after I lost everything. I don't know how to move forward. I've started seeing a therapist, but even that feels like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. She asks me questions about how I'm feeling, what I want for my future, and all I can say is that I don't know, because I don't. How do you rebuild a life when you've burned every bridge behind you? How do you make amends when the person you hurt the most doesn't want anything to do with you anymore? Mark was my everything. He was steady, kind, and patient in ways I didn't appreciate until it was too late. I think about all the times he tried to reach out, to connect, to save our marriage, and how I pushed him away because I was too caught up in my own selfishness. He deserved better. He still does. I know I shouldn't, but I've thought about calling him, about begging him to take me back, to let me explain one more time. But I know it's pointless. He's made his decision, and I have to respect that, even if it feels like it's killing me. I used to think I was in control of my life, that I could balance everything, my career, my marriage, my affair, without consequences. I thought I was invincible. But now sitting here in this empty apartment, unemployed and alone, I can see how wrong I was. The worst part is knowing I did this to myself. No one forced me to make the choices I made. No one pushed me into Ryan's arms or made me lie to Mark. It was all me. I've lost everything. The house, the marriage, the career I worked so hard to build. Ryan has moved on like none of it ever happened. And Mark is starting over without me. I'm left cleaning up the mess I made. And I don't even know where to start. If you're reading this, please don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't take the people who love you for granted. Don't let pride or ambition blind you to what really matters. I thought I could have it all, but in the end, I lost everything. Update. Hi Reddit, it's me again. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they haven't. In fact, they've somehow managed to get worse. I'm writing this from the same cramped, lifeless apartment I moved into after Mark kicked me out. And every day here feels like a new reminder of how far I've fallen. I've tried to stay off social media. I thought it might help to avoid seeing the happy, untouched lives of everyone I used to know. But staying off doesn't mean I'm immune to the whispers, the rumors, and the endless fallout of my mistakes. A few days ago, I heard through an old coworker, one of the few people still willing to talk to me, that Ryan has started dating someone new. Another secretary. She's young, vibrant, and exactly the kind of woman who probably doesn't carry the baggage I do. The coworker told me the office is buzzing with gossip about how quickly Ryan moved on. Apparently, he's been taking his new girlfriend out to the same bars we used to go to, making no effort to hide their relationship. It stings more than I want to admit, not because I'm still in love with Ryan. I see now that I never really was, but because it's a glaring reminder of how little I meant to him. To Ryan, I was nothing more than a passing distraction. He hasn't reached out to me once since I was fired. He's still walking around that office with his head held high, his reputation intact, while I'm left dealing with the aftermath of what we did. The worst part is knowing that I'm still a topic of conversation among people who used to respect me. My old coworkers, the ones I used to laugh with and grab coffee with, are now calling me the secretary who thought she could take down the boss. Someone even told me that Ryan jokingly referred to me as that messy chapter in a meeting. Hearing that broke me in a way I didn't expect. But it doesn't stop there. Mark, the man I betrayed and threw away for something so fleeting, has moved on too. A mutual friend sent me a photo of him the other day. Why, I don't know. Maybe she thought I needed to see it. Or maybe it was her way of twisting the knife. In the picture, Mark is sitting at a cafe with a woman I've never seen before. She's gorgeous, with this effortless smile that makes her look so kind and approachable. I shouldn't have, but I asked the friend about her. She told me her name is Sarah, and that she and Mark have been dating for a little while now. She also told me that Mark seems happier than he's been in years. Hearing that should have made me feel good, relieved even, that Mark is finding happiness after everything I put him through. But all it did was make me feel small. I can't stop thinking about how quickly he seems to have bounced back, how he's already building a new life while I'm sitting here, trying to figure out how to put the pieces of mine back together. And the truth is, I don't know where to start. Some days I think about leaving this town entirely, packing up what little I have left and starting over somewhere new where no one knows me or what I've done. But the idea of starting from scratch feels overwhelming. How do you rebuild a life when the foundation you had is gone? Other days, I think about staying, facing the consequences of my actions head on, and trying to prove to myself, and maybe even to others, that I can grow from this. But the thought of walking into a grocery store or a coffee shop and running into someone who knows my story makes me want to crawl out of my skin. Even the simplest errands feel like a minefield. Every time I step outside, I'm hyper aware of the possibility that someone might recognize me, that they might whisper behind my back or give me that look of pity and judgment I've come to dread. The isolation is crushing. I have no one to turn to, no friends, no family, no support system. Mark was my rock, the one person I thought I could always count on, and I destroyed that. Now he's moved on, and I'm left with the emptiness I created. I keep asking myself how I got here, how I let things spiral so far out of control. I thought I was smart, capable, in control of my life. But I wasn't. I let my pride, my ambition, and my craving for attention blind me to what really mattered. Ryan was never the answer. I see that now. He was a fantasy, an escape, something that felt exciting and new in the moment, but was never real. Mark was real. Our life together was real. And I threw it all away for what? For a man who moved on without a second thought, leaving me to deal with the wreckage? I don't know what to do anymore, Reddit. Should I stay and try to rebuild my life here, knowing that every day will be a reminder of what I've lost? Or should I leave, start fresh in a new place, and hope that distance can somehow help me heal? I've never felt this loss before. I don't know how to move forward, how to live with the choices I've made. All I know is that I'm paying the price for my actions, and it's a debt I don't think I'll ever fully repay. If you've made it this far, please, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't take the people you love for granted. Don't let pride or ambition blind you to what's truly important. I thought I could have it all, but in the end, I lost everything. I lost